If you're like every other independent filmmaker out there, you're trying to realize your vision with very little money and even less time. So for a jolt of creative inspiration, look no further than John Gaspard's duo of fantastic, fun, and informative books, Fast, Cheap, and Under Control, and Fast, Cheap, and Written That Way. In these two indispensable volumes, Mr. Gaspard collects invaluable insights from indie filmmakers and writers as diverse as George Romero, Robert Rodriguez, Kevin Smith, Dan Futterman, and Eric Bogosian. With exceptionally structured content presented in an easy-to-read, quick and breezy Q&A format, both of these books are must-owns for anyone interested in entering the world of filmmaking. It is a great pleasure to welcome back to our show Mr. John Gaspard. John, are you with us again?
You know, it's so tempting to put on a fake voice and say that I'm John Sayles and just.
I knew you'd want to do that.
Don't do that to us.
Voices, I'm sorry.
It's great to hear from you again. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a good half hour.
It was a good half hour. That was very interesting. I have not had a chance to see Enchanted yet because, you know, there's Sweeney Todd and there's Charlie Wilson's War, and then after that there's Enchanted. And you gotta.
Well, you should actually, you know, if you just tonight maybe. Check out Enchanted, seriously.
You know, I'm calling you from Minneapolis. We got about a foot of snow out there. I'm going to stay home.
Okay, stay home then. Okay, I'm sorry. Don't risk it for, you know, okay.
But you see, now if they had, you know, if I could watch it on TV tonight and pay $9, I'd do that.
That's right. That's right.
That's a whole other issue, yeah.
That might be something that might be a distribution tactic that's not too far off in the future. Where
they try it.
Well, IFC on our on-demand here. IFC has on-demand of the films that they have in the theaters right now.
All right.
So you could pay $7.99 and watch an independent film right now if it's IFC is the company that put it out.
Yeah.
Great idea.
Yeah.
I think more and more as theatrical dollars kind of suffer and the home entertainment market is just blossoming, you know, more and more. I think that's going to be a possibility. But John, tell me about your history in film. I know that you've directed or produced 6 low-budget films yourself, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been making film since I was about 13 years old. I made one of the first Super 8 sound feature films ever made in the world, and I don't recommend it. And I've shot on, we shot back in the 80s on the old U-matic video cassettes. Remember those big clunky things?
Yeah.
Oh, I remember those, yeah.
So that was like the first video, but it wasn't digital at that point. Then I've shot a couple features on 16 millimeter, and the last one was done fully digital.
So all of these experiences that you've had, there had to have been some perils or stumbling blocks that you ran into, and you must have thought to yourself, I wish I had, you know, someone, an expert here with me that has these answers. Is that the impetus of why you started these books?
Well, sort of. My producing partner, Dale Newton, and I made 2 movies in the 90s on 16 millimeter, one called Resident Alien, which is a sci-fi comedy, and one called Beyond Bob, which was a romantic comedy ghost story.
Yeah.
And we got done with both of them and realized that we'd learned, you know, as much as you're ever going to learn in a film school, doing both movies, and being the type of people we are, which is very, what's the polite word, very anal, we took a bunch of notes as to what we'd learned because we knew we were going to forget about it. And I said, you know, we have a book here. And he said, really? And I said, well, maybe. And so I did a little tiny bit of research to see what kind of books are out there and sent off 2 letters to 2 publishers and never got a response from one of them. And the other one called me up and said, it's a great idea for a book. Why don't you guys write it? So we ended up writing down everything we knew about filmmaking, which then became the book Digital Filmmaking 101.
Yeah.
And when that was done, the publisher called and said, do you have anything else you want to do? And when I was younger and starting out, there were some books that I read that I really, really liked and would keep going back to because they had really good lessons in them, like Filmmaker Superstar was one, and a film called Breaking Through, Selling Out, Dropping Dead, and other notes in filmmaking. And they had just really good lessons. And I said, you know, it would be great if someone assembled all the smart stuff people have said about how to do a low-budget movie. And he said, sure, go ahead and do that. So that became Fast, Cheap, and Under Control. And it started out as being just me kind of culling existing interviews and pulling just the best stuff out and putting them together under the headings of lessons. And then I found out that I could actually talk to people. People would return my calls.
Yeah.
So I didn't have to do all that culling. So about half the book is interviews with people, and the other half is sort of culled stuff. And when I was done with that, the publisher said, do you want to do another book? And I said, well, I've sort of done that, but one of the things I've noticed is that people really seem to gloss over the screenwriting process in low-budget filmmaking. They seem to say, well, I'm going to write a script in a couple days, and then I'm going to go out and shoot it. And then you hear about how they raised money and how they shot it and how they post and all that, but they never really talk about what it took to actually write the script. And I also thought, having done the previous book and having trouble getting a hold of directors and no trouble getting a hold of writers, I thought, well, the writers will talk, because writers like to talk. So we did the second book, which is Fast, Cheap, and Written That Way, which is all just interviews I did with writers who had started out in low-budget films. And I sort of fudged low budget from anywhere from, $30,000 up to $2.5 million or so.
Okay, so that's part of what I was interested in, what your criteria was when you were seeking out these filmmakers. What kind of boundaries?
Well, part of the criteria was, will they return my call?
Well, that's always
Which
important.
Is true. I mean, there's tons of people I would have liked to have talked to. I would have loved to have talked to Kevin Smith and had literally 2 years of emails with his assistant saying, yeah, maybe next week, Right. And never got that, although his stuff is pretty well documented, so we didn't need to talk to him.
Well, he documents it himself.
Yeah.
To an excessive degree.
Yeah, I mean...
the criteria was, I wanted to not keep doing kind of the same movie over and over, so I tried to find people who'd done really different movies. So it goes from Capote, which is probably our highest budget film, which is probably actually closer to $5 million now that I think about it, down to someone like Bob Clark, the late Bob Clark, who had done a terrible little zombie film called Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things.
Exactly.
Those films,
great title.
He's a hero to a lot of our listeners.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he even was surprised up to the end about how popular the film was. It's not a great little film, but one of the things he talks about is it's a great title.
Yes.
And that's one of the things that really got him launched in that script was having a really good title, which is something Amy Jones, who did Love Letters and Slumber Party Massacre, said, you got to have a good title. You don't want a movie, what did she say? You don't want a movie called Dust and Dirt. She was running into a lot of those sorts of things at film festivals. She said, have something provocative and interesting, and because that's the first thing people are going to hear about.
Yeah. That reminds me of the parody of the Oscars and those Naked Gun films, and they were announcing some of those terrible titles.
That's classic.
Sawdust and Mildew, or something similar to that. But did you find it that most everyone was very eager to participate and share their lessons that they've learned?
The ones who said yes did it because they really wanted to. I remember Kenneth Lonergan, who did You Can Count on Me.
Yeah. Oh, that must be cool.
He was so adamant about wanting to do this, and it took a lot of time to get his schedule and my schedule to come together. Rebecca Miller, who did Personal Velocity, who was living in Ireland at the time.
That's a great film.
Yeah. She was terrific about, there was like I think a 6-hour time difference between us, and just trying to figure out a time in her day in Ireland raising kids that would be a good time to call, which as it turned out was nap time, which was 4 a.m. here. So it's kind of nap time at both ends, actually.
Right.
But yeah, they were really, really, Dan Futterman was the same way. There's stuff that he really wanted to get on the record, and that nobody was asking him about. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you spoke of Rebecca Miller, and I was fascinated by something that she said when she's talking about writing for a low-budget film. She said, you kind of get bogged down by all these subplots and too many characters, and I think she said something like, when you peel the fingernail off the giant, a lot of times you realize that the story is in that fingernail.
Yep. Yeah, keep it small. Just look at the detail and try to follow up on that.
Yeah.
Which is sort of reflected in something Joan Milken Silver said, which was more of a production issue, but I left it in because it would affect screenwriting, which was when she did Hester Street, she was trying to recreate Ellis Island and couldn't afford to recreate the way she wanted to, and so she had to reduce it down to the single most important element. And in her mind, it was a chain link fence between the people who were trying to get in and the people who were already here. And so that's what the scene is. It's about the fence, and it isn't about trying to recreate this huge room with all these teeming masses of extras in perfect period clothing, because she couldn't do that. So she was able to reduce it down to the essential idea, which and then drove her crazy when she could see Godfather Part 2, when Coppola had all the money in the world and did that big shot with all the extras and all.
Right.
But that's low-budget filmmaking.
Is the low-budget independent film, is it getting harder to define nowadays in terms of what an independent film is?
Well, I think it's always been hard to define what independent is because everybody shares one thing, which is a need to get in front of an audience. Mm-hmm. And that's true of any artistic endeavor. The hardest part is the last part, distribution. Mm-hmm. And so you're independent up until that point, and then you're either dependent or nobody ever sees you.
Right.
Yeah. So it's I think because there's more people making more movies because it's easier and cheaper to do it, it's feeling like independent cinema is different now. But I don't think it really is that different because distribution is still the biggest.
That's the holy grail.
It really is. I mean, I know they say people can, you can watch Edward Burns' new movie on iTunes if you want.
Yeah.
But
that's right.
Most people don't want to sit in front of the computer and watch movies. I mean, there's the geeks of us who will. But after a while, it is refreshing to go to the theater to see. Yeah, we're never going to lose that. And as long as, the big companies are in control of what goes into the theaters, and the theaters are beholden to them because they're not going to get the next big movie unless they run this one, mm-hmm. It's going to be really hard for small films to be seen in front of big audiences.
Yeah. I want to talk about a couple of the concepts that you discuss in both of these books. In the first book, Fast, Cheap, and Under Control, when it comes to having more control on your production, they say that less money actually can benefit you. I've heard it spoken several times in the book that the less money you have, the more control you have.
Yeah, I think that's true.
How does that work? Explain that to me.
Well, I'll just use a personal example because I made a movie a couple years ago, digital film called Grown Men for approximately $11,000 to $13,000. It was somewhere in there. And I had a friend at the time who raised money and made a movie for about $150,000. And they were both done at about the same time. Now, the pressure on him to take almost any deal that would come along in order to get that movie out was much greater than the pressure on me because I didn't have anybody except me and my wife looking at me going, where's the money? But I didn't have investors saying, where's my $50,000? Mm-hmm. So you have a greater level of control if it's less money. And that's, of course, at the distribution end. During the shooting end, you actually have more control, too, because there's nobody breathing down your neck saying, this is costing money to do this every day. A regular movie costs thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a day to shoot. If you're just running out with your friends in a little digital cam and you got a light kit and some actors, it's not going to cost you that much if you spend another hour on something.
It also forces you to make more creative choices, too, when you can't throw money at a problem. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Rodriguez calls it the money hose.
Yeah.
If you don't have the money hose, you got to come up with something else.
Yeah. And a lot of times those creative solutions are infinitely more interesting and serve the film a lot better than the alternative.
Almost always.
Yeah. And a few of the points of how to write for lower budget films, I know it's emphasized several times, fewer characters and fewer locations. I guess the real struggle is how to not let the struggles of working within a limited budget limit your imagination when you're writing.
Right. That's something I asked, I think, just about all of them, and I think they're split kind of 50-50. Some of them, and this is, I think, 23 writers in that book, some of them were very conscious throughout of any time they wrote something, the impact it was going to have on the budget. And then some, like Casey Lemons or Ali Salim, who did Sweetland, didn't give it a second thought. In fact, in Ali Salim's case, he wrote the script and then rewrote it and had people do readings, and really was not concerned about the budget until when he was ready to make it, at which point a producer sat down with him and said, okay, scene inside a train, can't do that, make the scene inside of a train station because we can't afford a moving train. And the little things like that he was able to make the adjustments, save tons of money, but he hadn't let that worry him as he was writing it. So, I mean, and that worked for him. For some people, you got to have the, how many sets do I have? Okay, I'll write to that many sets.
Yeah.
If you look at, I think it's Bill Martell's site, on script writing, and he's done about 20 cable films. He's just brilliant about breaking it down and going, okay, I've got X number of pages, therefore I can have X number of sets, therefore if I'm writing 5 pages on that set here, I've got to come back to that set for 7 more pages at some point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You can take that approach too. That's the problem with filmmaking, as with a lot of things. There's no absolute right or absolute wrong answer. There's just whatever works.
Right.
But what are some of the common mistakes though when people are trying to write within a limited budget?
Well, they'll forget that inside the house is a move from outside the house. They'll forget that if you've got a house and you write scenes for 7 rooms, you've got to move the cameras and everybody 7 times. And they'll think of it as one location.
Right.
It isn't. They'll think of night and day as being just as cheap to shoot, and day is very cheap to shoot, and night, depending on what you're trying to shoot, can be very expensive if you're outside. But it's stuff that if budget isn't an issue like it is in most movies, you would never even think of it. It's like if you're going to do a big gunfire scene, it's much easier to have glass blown out than to have bullets hitting brick walls, because you got to plant all the squibs and blow them all up.
Right.
But all you got to do is replace a piece of glass if that's what you're doing.
Right. With these interviews with all these filmmakers, do you get a sense that they prefer to work in the low-budget field because it kind of brings out the best of what they have to offer?
I think they like the independence that comes with low budget, because they are, first and foremost writers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that being said, I think they're willing to do what's necessary to get their movie made, and if that means that they've got to rewrite something for a budgetary reason, they're wise enough to know, that you have to sometimes give up things because that's the realm you want to work in.
Yeah. Now, the publisher, it's Michael Wise Publications that has published these 3 of your books. And we've interviewed several of their authors, and they're a great company, a film.
They're great guys.
Yeah, great company, and we've been infinitely impressed by their line of books. But you say that every time out they offer you another book. What else do you have now? Have they come back to you, or what are your future plans?
Well, it's funny. He just did email me this week. He lives in England now. I don't know if you know Michael. He was the guy who produced the first Star Wars parody,
Hardware Wars.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Which is a very funny movie. Even, in fact, he redid it recently as the new digital version. So he goes way back when it comes to independent filmmaking. And he did email me this week with an idea for another low-budget book. But I'm starting to work on a novel now, actually finishing a novel, and need to work on that. And also probably should get back to actual filmmaking, because that's been a couple of years.
Right.
Listening to other people talk about it, which is fun for a while, but
it gets the itch going again, doesn't it?
Something else, yeah.
Yeah, but how rewarding is the process of writing these books? And I know you say that you're working on a novel. Is it a different kind of reward writing these types of books compared to a novel?
It's entirely different. What's really fun, and I think I've actually said it in one of the books, really only the reason that I did the writer book was I wanted to talk to these people. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you guys got to read what I heard was kind of incidental. That was the fun part.
Yeah.
Sitting on the phone listening to Kenny Lonergan talk, or Dan Futterman, who was terrific, Stuart Gordon, who did Reanimator, who is one of the nicest guys in the world, and is so smart about drama because he's part of the Organic Theater in Chicago, and he brings all that theatrical stuff with him, which other people don't. That was fun. Then you got to type it and edit it, and that's not really fun. And then you get to hear from other filmmakers who've read it and who have their own points of view on it. That's the fun part. Once it gets out, then you start getting emails and stuff, and that's fun again.
So it's a real tidal. It's a real wave. It's
a real up and down kind of thing.
Up and down. So novel writing. Have you written a novel previously?
I never have, and I didn't intend to do one now, but I had an idea for a movie and started doing notes on it, and realized pretty quickly that the stuff I was writing wouldn't work in a screenplay, that it was too interior, too much of the character's thoughts, and before I knew it, it was a novel. So.
Wow.
Wow, that's very much like John Sayles' kind of path.
Kind of going the other way. Yeah, he started as.
But that's true. But I see that in his films too, in that they have kind of, some of them have they feel like novels on film. I felt that way about Zodiac earlier this year, where it played like a great novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, he's a very literary writer. That's pretty clear in his work.